Welcome to Make Europe Great Again TV, second of a series of interviews interviewing activists, political campaigners from around the world and from Europe, and people that are hoping to make their country a better place. And today I have South African former politician. He tried to be a politician. He's many things. It's Roodt from South Africa. You're from Johannesburg. You have 6 degrees, including a PhD. You've been a university lecturer. You've been a banker. You stood for election for the Freedom Front Plus Party. You're a writer, a regular broadcaster. You appear on TV and radio. Time Live called you an anti-establishment anarchist, but now you're branded a right-wing reactionary. Who are you, Roodt?
Yes, well, I suppose, those are all labels, and I've tried throughout my life to resist labels or not to fall easily into any category, but I think life is pretty complex, and politics is a complex domain of human activity, and therefore, one makes certain choices or makes certain statements on issues, and some people might label you, but you know that you are speaking the truth. And I think in the past, there was a kind of a very tired ruling clique in South Africa that needed renewal from within. But unfortunately, they then took the option of completely capitulating to this crazy left-wing regime that we've got at the moment. But now it's very necessary to speak out against the very many injustices that are taking place in South Africa and the absurdities that we are living through now, that are even worse than any that occurred in the past.
You called the current government left-wing. A lot of people will call them Marxist, based on the European model. We know the economic freedom fighters are definitely Marxist,
yes,
and they're proposing that for Africa. Do you think the ANC is Marxist, or do you think it's just left-wing, or just like European politics, there's a mixture of everything in there?
Well, I definitely think they are Marxist. And in fact, on my recent visit to Poland, I explained to the one group there why and how it works. When I put it this way, when the rest of the world moved away from communism and when the Berlin Wall fell, we rolled out the red carpet to the communists, to the Communist Party, who was very doctrinaire. And for a long part of its history, especially in the 1960s, 70s and 80s, the ANC that currently rules the country was just a front for the Communist Party. They were funded by the Communist Party, were getting some money from the Soviet Union, but then Sweden stepped in to give them even more funds to support the Soviet, horse in the race. But what they've done is they have actually changed their terminology. They kept the ideas, but they changed the terminology. Instead of Marxist revolution, it was now freedom and democracy. And instead of revolution, the term revolution, they now using transformation. Society has to be not revolutionized, but transformed. But it's the same thing.
Same thing, yeah.
And ultimately, they're also working with a very rigid notion of equality, as in the former communist countries. And they want to level South Africa completely. They want to wipe out, the differences between people, the class differences, the differences in educational levels, except, of course, for the elite, for those connected with power, and they will just get richer and richer.
Communism.
Exactly. So it's communism all over, and especially lately with their plans to nationalize all farmland, and their interventions and meddling in education, and they're even now talking about, putting all the children through a special history course where they will be indoctrinated with their version of history. Yeah, it's communism all over. And some of it you could call cultural Marxism, or not Marxist-Leninism, but it is still Marxism, essentially. If you, and I know quite a lot about Marxism because I studied at a very left-wing university, where, as a sort of a reaction against the Marxist hegemony at the university, I became a kind of an anarchist, but more of a right-wing anarchist who stood for individual liberty and in limiting the interference of the state in one's own personal freedom.
Yep.
And at the moment in South Africa, we're getting more and more interference in our personal freedom by the state.
Yeah, well, that's exactly what's happening here. We don't have free speech in the Parliament. If we utter something that isn't quite politically correct in there, then the microphones are turned off. There are moves afoot to clamp down on Facebook and Twitter, and the Parliament and my own country and the individual countries are putting pressure on the social media companies to say you can't have fake news, you can't have freedom of speech, basically. In London at the moment, there's a sort of big turn in politics where we had this a guy who's a right-wing reactionary, Tommy Robinson. He was 2 weeks ago. You know him. You've interviewed Tommy?
No, I haven't.
No.
But I've been following him on Twitter, and all the Twitter accounts, and I've seen some of his videos and seen what he's doing. And so
he's a very Marmite character. You either love him or you hate him. But what he's done, he's sparked a reaction. A very grassroots, ordinary, working-class people who said, OK, you've shut him up. It's going to be me next. You've banned me from Twitter. I've been banned from Facebook because of my opinions. And this is happening all over. And there's this real grassroots movement now that is coming together. And we're seeing more right-wing governments that are taking over in Europe, like Austria, Poland, Hungary, Italy now. It's great. We've got Brexit. I wonder, can you envisage that sort of switch to the right in your country, or is it so enmeshed with Marxism, with the ANC, who is frightened of losing votes to the economic freedom fighters, so therefore they're becoming more reactionary Marxist communists?
Yes.
That's quite a frightening thought, that the EF will be in coalition with the ANC next year in the May elections.
Well, you've heard of the Overton window, and essentially, for the viewers who might not know, he was some American guy who coined this phrase, or became associated with him, and it has to do with the collection of ideas that are acceptable in a society and in its media and so on, and that's the Overton window. And it's usually, or it should be around the center of the political spectrum, but in a country like South Africa, it's moved completely to the left. So even the Liberal Party that used to be kind of center, I would even center right almost, in the initial years, the Democratic Alliance, they've adapted their policies and they've shifted to the left, and they are now almost have the same ideas as the ANC did, say, 10 or 20 years ago. So they've moved to the left, the ANC has moved to the left, and the EFF has gone even more extreme. So anybody who's just a sane person is now, a rational, sane person is now considered a right-wing reactionary within that context. But in Europe, you've had the opposite now. The Overton window has moved to the right. I mean, I can remember when I lived in France, Jean-Marie Le Pen and the Front National were just not, they were almost unspeakable. It would be unthinkable for the Front National to be granted, radio and TV interviews like any other candidate. And now, with Marine, with his daughter
she's
now,
transformed the party.
She's transformed the party. But they've also now been accepted as part of the mainstream politics in France.
By people.
By people, yes.
Not the media, not the mainstream media. She got 33% against Macron last year.
Exactly.
She is the official opposition to Macron, so they have become more mainstream. She's a good friend of mine, and we miss her terribly in here. But do you think she'd ever be able to get sort of away from the Le Pen name, though? That's the argument here. They've just changed their official name for the party.
Yeah, I don't think necessarily it needs to be an impediment to her future success. I think, it's a bit complicated to go into the French politics now, but I think, as a constructive criticism of her and the Front National, I think they misjudged the French public's enthusiasm for Europe and for the euro also. I think on the euro, they took a very hardline position on that.
Yeah.
And I think for that reason, they probably lost votes. I mean, if they'd taken a more moderate position on the euro and you know, just opting out of
Frexit.
Frexit, they would have got a lot more votes.
But in Europe, the parties, the argument about bringing down this place coming out of the EU is not so advanced as it was in the UK. You know, we've been fighting for it for 20 years, but I mean, I have hope for the Le Pen name, and I love Marine. She's a good friend of mine, because the Mussolinis did it. You think about where the Mussolinis, and we've got Alexandra Mussolini, who sits with, you know, the centre-right Conservatives. So there is hope, and we wish her well. But going back to your country, when you look at the farm murders, which the mainstream media here will not talk about. If you talk to the politicians here, it's a figment of imagination. It's all made up by the nasty right-wing faction in South Africa. But we've got some official figures. And farm murders, so far from January 18 to March 18, we've had 18 murders, 134 attacks. And in May alone, there's been 5 murders with 33 attacks. It seems to me the only country that's actually listening to the farmers is Australia, which has offered land and asylum to the farmers. What's your reaction to the reality of what's going on in the farms? And I was in South Africa last year on Black Monday, and I saw the desperation in those people.
Yes. No, I think it's absolutely abominable. And, you know, the state, which has the responsibility of protecting the people. I mean, why else do we have a police force? I mean, they have utterly failed in protecting these people and these farmers. And there is definitely much more than crime going on. And people who are calling it a form of genocide, I think they are on the right track. You know, in terms of the absolute numbers, you know, it doesn't compare with, say, millions of people killed in Cambodia or something like that. But if you look at the intensity of the violence, the sadism involved, the ethnic element there, you know, it's people of another race and another culture that are being attacked, a vulnerable minority exposed in rural areas. Yeah, it is a form of genocide gaining ground in South Africa, and it's absolutely shocking. And the fact that people all over the world are not, you know, that other governments are not speaking out about it, as Australia is doing, is also, I think, very, very disappointing. You know, especially in Europe, where people are going on about human rights all the time. And we've got I mean, Australia is also part of the New World.
Australia is also part of the Commonwealth.
Yes, exactly.
Like South Africa.
Yes.
And I wrote to Boris Johnson a few months ago and highlighting the problem here and said, look, please, you know, it is a part of the Commonwealth. We have got the head of the Commonwealth in our country. Please, will you intervene? There's been silence. When I came back from South Africa to the Parliament in December, I asked for an urgent human rights debate. They always debate human rights on a Thursday. It's okay for Venezuela or some left-wing regime or some ultra-left right-wing regime somewhere. And I said, please, you know, this is good. Can we have a debate? And they had a vote. And there was a few on our side that proposed this. But even the extreme left, and we have communists here as well, who are always banging on about human rights, they just refuse to have it. And my take from that is that actually only some humans' rights matter in this place, and it isn't South Africans. It isn't the white minority in South Africa, because I think it's such a toxic debate. They can't bear to think that the Rainbow Nation has failed.
Yes. Well, I ascribe that to two things. The one would be, I mean, George Orwell wrote these beautiful kind of treatises on the dystopian character of left-wing thought and left-wing societies or left-wing utopias that become dystopias. And, you know, when he said that some animals are more equal than others, he could have well have said some humans have more rights than others. You know, they are more deserving of human rights than others, and we are not deserving of human rights because we happen to be a European minority on a black continent. Whereas the converse, black people or Arab people in Europe, they have all the rights. They sometimes have even more rights than the indigenous people. That's the one element. You know, the second one, I would say, is that the left and even the mainstream conservatives have been so wrong on South Africa for decades now. You know, the only person who really summed it up was Margaret Thatcher when she said, you know, anybody thinking that the ANC should rule South Africa is living in cloud cuckoo land. And she was absolutely right.
And she was on so many things.
Exactly. And now, you know, people are they're in a state of denial about South Africa. I mean, their own embassies must be reporting all of this stuff to them, and they're just too scared to say anything and to admit how wrong they've been for so long. And I mean, we are going, if things go along in this fashion, South Africa is going to be a catastrophe, and it's going to affect the whole continent, and it's going to have an impact on Europe as well. So sooner or later, they will face the music. You know, and those ones like Australia, who admirably is one of the first to, you know, to kind of see that the emperor has no clothes anymore. I mean, I think that's commendable, and we must. I take my hat off to the Australians.
Well, we've been trying to highlight the fact when I had Dr. Courtney Mulder over just a few months ago. I was talking about the elections coming up and what will happen. So if the ANC go into coalition with the EF, what will happen? And he said there will be a genocide, and it won't be on the scale of Zimbabwe.
Yes.
It will be on the scale of Rwanda. And then we started talking about the people. And that, yeah, there will be devastation, there will be murders, it will be carnage. And then I thought, right, if the right-wing politicians or the mainstream left in Europe and across the States are not listening to it, appeal to the Greens. So what happens to the ecological system? You know, the farmlands are managed,
Yes.
and you think of it, you know, I've been on safari a number of times. Absolutely fantastic the way we look after the animals,
Yes.
it's in a natural state, etc. I've been down to Hermanus, where riots are kicking off all the time. Down there at the moment, things are being set alight, and it's got one of the most thriving, wonderful tourist ecological sites. It's where the whales go along.
Yes.
It's their breeding grounds. It's the most fabulous site. They've got one of the last penguin colonies down in Africa. All that is at risk. So at least if you're not interested in the humans from the Greens, from the left, think about the ecology that's suddenly going to be devastated. You know, there's thriving lions, elephant colonies, rhinos, few of the last rhinos down there. If you don't care about the humans, think about the devastation of the animals, because if you take over those farms, I think 265 were sold off from lands. Only 10% of those farms actually make a profit now and actually are producing crops to eat. So suddenly the land is wiped out. There'll be starvation. They will go after the animals.
Sure.
There will be devastation on the scale, probably worse than Rwanda, because you've managed your ecosystem down there.
Yes, you're absolutely right. I think a country that's an example of where the wildlife was completely destroyed as a result of a Marxist regime and famine, that engendered eventually famine, is Mozambique. And I haven't been there myself, but people tell me that in Mozambique there's no, apart from humans, there's no living thing left. I mean, no birds, nothing, because they've all been eaten. And exactly the same will happen in South Africa if this crazy farm nationalization plan goes through. They will definitely kill off the wildlife next. And the farmers play a unique role in the ecology of the country, and the farmers are very much aware of that. And I listen to radio programs sometimes where they come on about some or other raptor or eagles or vultures or something, and there are veterinary experts talking about it, and the farmers call in and they listen to that, and they tailor their lives, and they will even to protect these creatures, and they will even forego income if they can keep the ecology sound and protect the animals. And all of that will go out the window.
I visited a conservation programme just outside Cape Town where they were breeding dogs, enormous mountain things from Europe, because farmers were actually shooting the cheetahs. And they were trying to educate them and say, actually, it's not the cheetahs that are taking your sheep, because it's not night time, it's other predators. So if you have one of these dogs, and we fund that by saving the leopards and bringing them in, and the tourists can come and see them. It's very well run. I don't like touching wild animals, but it was fascinating to see. And so they were persuading them to have these dogs. And all of a sudden, the cheetah numbers were going up again. It was saving. So that was the sort of ecological project that was then disseminated down to the farmers. That will be lost. And the cheetah population will just be devastated because of that. And I think that's such a crime as well, let alone the human crimes. One of the things that Corny Mulder said to me about his party, the Freedom Front Plus party, which I know you were associated with, he was saying that he's got an awful lot of black support because of this sort of, homogenisation of language that the ANC wants to raise the past. A lot of the black tribes are saying, well, actually, we're going to support you now because you recognise our culture and our heritage. And it's a big sort of debate that's going on in here at the moment about preserving our European culture and heritage. And that's what he was saying. So they want to preserve their language. They want to preserve their tribal, to have the ability to still have their tribes and their language and their culture. So it's quite interesting. They were going away from the Democratic Alliance, they were going away from the ANC, and they were going to support him. He also believes in the separation of the country to preserve life, wildlife and culture. And I think you've had similar thoughts along those lines about separation.
Yes, exactly. Because, you see, we're sitting in Brussels now, and you know that in Belgium there are 7 parliaments, even not counting the European Parliament, but nationally there are 7 parliaments, and there are only 3 languages in Belgium. But in South Africa we've got 11 official languages. It's a very diverse country. There are lots of Indians there. There are coloured people who have their own unique identity. So, the tragedy is that the old system, which was moving in the direction of a federation or some kind of confederation, was simply, it could have ended up there, that we have a Swiss system or a Belgian system or a Canadian system of federation, and where, we don't get into each other's hair all the time. That was replaced with what I would call democratic centralism according to the Leninist model. And it's even worse than that because, in fact, I've read an article written by a Catalan academic in French, so it's not widely available, but where he compared the Soviet system and policy towards cultural diversity and that of the ANC and the South African Communist Party. And the Soviet Union was much more enlightened on that issue than the ANC and the South African Communist Party. They talk about colonialism, but in fact they are practicing a kind of Bantu colonialism in South Africa. And they are just destructive on each and every level. And whether it's the nature and the wildlife, or it's people's cultures and languages, or it's the economy, it's just... it is a complete dystopia that's taking place. South Africa used to be the most developed country in Africa, and we had a bright future ahead of us. If we hadn't taken so many bad decisions, or if we hadn't been boycotted so much and so on, we could have been up there with Canada and Australia by now. We were part of the Commonwealth in 1931, together with those countries. And we had tremendous mineral wealth. We could have done so much better, but unfortunately we made the radical choice, and we are now paying the price for it.
And the campaigns that go on in this place, we must boycott. Look what's happening with Russia. Russia's actually coming back stronger. This place imposes a boycott on goods and services. Russia comes back stronger. It's not going to work. On a more topical point, the World Cup's coming up. Apparently it's on the June the 14th. I'm more of a rugby girl. I always support South Africa as long as you're not playing England. In 2010, you advised the Afrikaners to support the Netherlands football team instead of South Africa. Why? And what are you going to be doing in this World Cup?
Yes, well, at that time there was World Cup fever in South Africa, but I just find that the South African team is just so bad, and there's so little, in this I actually wrote a little book about that, which is called Raiders of the Lost Empire.
I saw that. Is it available on your website?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Now, they've created this artificial new identity and around the soccer team as well, the football team, Bafana. And that essentially excludes us, this new
you've seen it with rugby
identity.
as well.
Exactly. And with the rugby, it's now starting with the rugby and it's going to go down the way.
There. It used to be great to watch.
We can't really identify with that. And they're not doing anything to make it possible for us to identify with that. So in that case, I felt I could identify more with the Dutch team, because we've always had that old a flag which they now want to ban and so on, and they've actually banned it at rugby matches, the old orange, blue and white, orange, white and blue flag, which was the Dutch flag in the 17th century, and the Dutch use orange as their color. And I mean, we've got a lot of surnames that are the same, and they are a very successful team as well, the Dutch team. So I felt more inclined to support them, as I cannot really identify with my current government, nor with this artificial identity that they've created. I mean, we have natural, in the country, we've got a lot of natural, organic identities that have developed over a long time. And if they were cleverer, they would have, combined. I think in Belgium, to some extent, I mean, they always say that Belgium has, a royal house and a soccer team. At least the Belgians feel free to, from the different communities, language communities, feel free to support their national team. And it could have been the same in South Africa, but if the government had been a bit more enlightened.
And this year in Russia?
Yeah, I haven't made up my mind yet, but as far as I know, South Africa is not even going to be participating because I think they fell out in the in the qualifying round, so they won't even be there. So
it's not an issue there.
So it's not an issue there.
As I say, I follow rugby, but I did pick up.
Maybe I'll support the Dutch team again, because these days I've got so many friends in Holland who are always, asking me to come and visit them and so on. So. Yeah, and I hope they do well, yes.
Okay. Our time's coming to an end. Where now for Roodt? What are you going to do next?
Well, I'm on this tour of Europe now, and I really want to, I'm dead set against this land nationalization, as well as the violence, the killing of our farmers, and I really want to do something to stop it. And I have some plans up my sleeve to do just that.
Okay, well, perhaps we can have another conversation once you're ready to launch those plans. I'm happy to talk to you either in South Africa, back here, or we can do an interview because I know there's an awful lot of people in Europe and in the EU, because the EU is not the same as Europe. And there's a lot of people in here that support you. So, Roodt, I love your country and I wish you well. And thank you for today.
Well, it's been a great pleasure talking to you, and I really feel honoured to in this
venerable institution.
In this venerable institution, or this hallowed hall. Yes.
Don't get carried away.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.